graves, and this is the way we remember Grandma and Grandpa. I think most of you kids. Yeah, this is my parents, the ones in the corner here. When they were older, just not too long before they died. And the couple in the ovals are my great-grandfather Zadok Bowen, who came to Kansas from Indiana in a covered wagon in 1855 with this wife. This is his first wife. She's not the one that I descend from. He came, and his graves are just down here a little ways, and we'll walk down there in a few minutes. And he came with 2 children, and one of the children died shortly after they got here, and that child is buried here with Zadok. And then they had 4 more children, so they had a total of 6, and then within about 16 months of each other, the mother and 4 of those remaining children died. So he was left then with one little girl, and her name was Anne Maria, and she has a posterity that I'll tell you about a little bit later. Then Zadok married his second wife, and she is the great-grandmother that I descend from, and her name was Minerva. And then this grave right here is my Uncle Charlie Montford's grave, and I think most of you kids remember Uncle Charlie. He was dear to us and died about I guess it's been maybe 8 years. He died at the same time that Ethel Curry died, and Aunt Martha, his wife, is still living. And then Uncle Raymond Barbee is buried, I think over in here someplace. I have notes on. And Aunt Adelia is my mother's only sibling who is still living. She is 88 years of age now, and after Uncle Raymond died, then she married again to Howard Huston farm, which is just a few miles from here. But again, we have Zadok's picture, Zadok Kramer Bowen's picture, the one who homesteaded the farmland that I grew up on. And then the picture next to him is his second wife, Minerva, the great-grandmother that I descend from. Zadok and Minerva then had 2 children, and one of them then is Walter, who is my dad's dad. And my dad is this boy on the left-hand corner. And Walter married Emma Largent, and Emma grew up in this area too. But her father's death is another interesting story too. A horse kicked him in the leg, and he was only, I think, in his 40s or 50s. I have to review that. A horse kicked him in the leg, and it became infected, and they operated on him at home on a door, laid out like a door, and they operated on him, and then he died after that. So it was hard for those people. And then this is my parents' wedding picture, so you can see how they look when they were young. Grandma looks cute, doesn't she?
I don't know we're here too, unless you know that Richland is.
I just remember driving quite a ways to get there, but it was just kind of...
I've got you, Stacy. I've got you too, Kara.
Oh, no, you can't do that.
Be sure you get Jim's shirt.
Yeah,
I've got Jim's shirt.
Jim put that on this morning.
Down here.
We laugh about that shirt. He bought it for a 6th grade dance festival, and he wears it regularly since then.
Well, Jared and Kristen wear those all the time too.
Kind of shirt
That's
Zachary
a very
would
nice
reach for. He loves things with the big flowers on it. Great.
We went up to visit his brother, and we got there, and his brother had one on just almost. I'm going, oh,
They must be
we must be getting old.
5 years old.
Well,
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Where's Zadok?
Yeah, this says mother here. So this is probably. Yeah, I'm sure that must be his.
And what year did he die?
He died in about, let's see, I didn't indicate, but it's about, I think it's about 1890
So it's been 100 years.
or 1880. I'm not sure which it was. Yeah, that looks like that could say father on there, doesn't it?
It's still.
A farmland where my dad grew corn and wheat and all kinds of, like sorghum and Milo that he was always talking about.
And now you raise Milo here.
Yeah, and he had all kinds of
cattle.
Stacy's making me nervous.
I'm sorry.
These are interesting. I should have written a speech to share.
Zooming right
And so that kind of where you can see the trees over there between where you can see the tall trees and the lower trees is the Wakarusa Creek. And the Clinton Dam apparently runs down into there. And
So did you have that many trees when you were growing up over there? Or was it?
well, there was a row of trees. There weren't that many trees, but we would go down and there was a row of trees that we called the hedgerow. And there were fields between that hedgerow and the house.
Okay.
It was just a small field.
And you said how many acres he owned?
In the beginning, when he came here, he homesteaded,
Zadok did.
Zadok homesteaded, let's see, what would be
A mile square is a section.
160? A fourth of a section, what would that be?
So it's about 160.
160 acres, and that was way off on that corner of this square that is a mile square. And he and another man came here from Indiana in their covered wagons with their families, and I'm hoping that we can drive the road that runs along east of the farm down to where there is a bridge that we call the Wakarusa Creek Bridge. And so when Zadok came, he built on this side of the creek a little log cabin, and the other man built on the other side of the creek. Well, then this was before all the section lines were drawn up and so forth, and when they drew up the section lines, Zadok's log cabin was off of the property that he was supposed to be able to claim. And since it flooded down there, he decided then to move up onto the bluffs. And so he built a log house then on top of the bluffs. And then, let me see if I can, and he came here in 1855. And so the first, then he had his second log cabin there, and then they added a big kitchen to that log cabin after a few years, and that's the kitchen that was there when I grew up. And then eventually they knocked down the log cabin and they built
The white farmhouse.
yeah, they built the rest of the house. So this is kind of in two sections. The kitchen is like here or here. And this is what it looked like then when it was completely done. Now the second part of the house was done after he died. He had the plans all drawn up for it, and they had the first, well, it'd be actually the second section of it. The kitchen section added to the log house. And then he died, and so then Minerva completed the building.
Well, what did this house up by the road have to do with all this?
Well, I was thinking about that since. Then there was a house right up here where we turned in, and that was where my father was born and lived until he was 10 years of age. I was starting to explain about how Zadok accumulated this land. Well, anyway, he got that first quarter section down there, and then eventually he bought the rest of, he bought another quarter section, so then it was like half of a section. And then eventually then he bought the other half of the section over there, so it was a square mile.
So when he moved up,
640
so when he
acres.
moved up onto the bluff after he got flooded out
Yes.
or whatever, was he on his land then, or?
Yes, he was on his land. That was still on that first quarter section. And I don't remember where, I think it was about where that hedgerow was then, where his land ended when he just had a quarter section, and then he bought the rest of it up to the road here.
But
And
he used to drive all the way from here to Leavenworth, Kansas with his wheat or corn to have it ground and come back with the flour. And you know, Leavenworth is way over there on the border.
yeah, it's close to Kansas City. It's a long ways over. And
So they took it to a grist mill that had it ground.
now, when he built his first log cabin down where the Wakarusa Creek Bridge was, then that was, I'm sure, during his first marriage. But I don't, before his wife died with the children. And I don't know what stage he was at in his marriage to his second marriage, as he accumulated this land. But
But you see,
that's kind of the
when
order.
those kids died, they were down there by that water, so I'm sure that was...
Yeah. So then when Zadok married a second time, then he had Walter, who is my dad's dad, and Edith, who is the rich aunt that you all hear about, the one who had all the property in Texas, the oil wells, the gas wells, and so forth. And so the family since then has inherited, money from her. But anyway, Walter got married. The son from this second marriage got married, and I don't know whether they built this house right up here where those trees are before you turned in on this road or not. But there was when I was growing up, there was a house and a barn and another building or two there. And I know that is where Walter and Emma, my grandparents, lived when they had most of their family. And then they decided to move to Iowa because there were other relatives who lived in Iowa, and an uncle had passed away, and Walter and Emma decided to move up there and take over that property.
Well, they inherited from
And his name was Alex, so Alex. Uncle Alexander Bowen. He never married, but people always talked about him, about what a good man he was. He was quite prosperous.
We got Alex and Jacob now.
Yeah, that's right. And so my dad was 10 or 12 years of age then when that family moved to Iowa. And then my grandmother, Zadok was dead by that time, but Minerva was living. And she lived for, what did I say on here, for about 34 years, I think, after he died. And so in the meantime, my mom was growing up over in the Twin Mound area, which is way over south of here a little ways, and my dad was growing up in Iowa, and he went into World War I, and somewhere before my dad went away to service, he came down to visit Minerva, his grandmother, and my mother was working for Minerva as a hired girl, and that was common in that days. The young girls would go to work for older people who needed help, or moms who had a lot of children or something. So my mom was working for Minerva, and Dad came down to visit his grandmother, and he met my mother then. Well, then somehow or the other they kind of started getting together, except he was there and she was here, and I think that's right. That's approximately right anyway. And so my dad, the Bowen family decided that my dad could either go to Colorado, where the Bowen family had property, or he could come to Kansas and live. And since my mom was from Kansas, they decided that they would come here. And so they came and took over this property here. And so that's why, I was born here.
What age were you when they went to Colorado?
Well,
And why did they go to Colorado?
Because they didn't get a son-in-law who was a farmer.
No, that's not the reason.
they lived here the year that Daddy and I were married. They moved to Colorado the same year that Daddy and I were married, just after we were married.
Trying to get away from you, that's what it was.
Kansas is a little too close to Minnesota, so we'll look a little further west.
Well, actually, my grandparents, Walter and Emma, had decided to buy some property in Colorado out on the Plains area. Because it was only something like, was it $3 an acre or something? It was just really, really cheap. And they knew that they had 4 sons, and they knew that they were were going to need more farmland for their boys to farm, and my dad was growing up and going into the service, and so they decided to invest in some of this property out there, and so they bought a full section of land out there. Well, when my dad first came home from the Army, then he went out there and lived for 2 years, and he farmed that property, or ranched that property, and he just loved it. But then I think I need to kind of review the history a little more, I guess. But then I think it was then that he and my mom decided to get married, and so then they decided to move here, and so that land just, it was rented out, but it wasn't taken care of very well.
Rented out for share.
Yeah, and my dad, all the time I was growing up, he always talked about how wonderful it was ranching in Colorado. He just loved being there, and he had asthma, and so climate agreed with him because it was lighter there. And he always dreamed of going back there, and he would go back after I got old enough to remember, he'd go back every year or so to check on the property and make sure that they were taken care of, they should have. And he actually got to where he went out there and did a lot of farm work himself. And I guess he must have taken machinery with him. I can't remember that. But I remember going back and forth out there. So then by the time we got married, then they had decided that they were going to move out there. And so
that's when they sold this.
So then they sold this property, and it had been in the Bowen family then for 99 years. Dad sold it, and he was living in it. The house burned down then the year that my dad died, which was 1972. And I think we brought all of you kids in here to see the house. You can all see, but this is my dad. This is Uncle Warren, and he had farmland in Iowa. And this is Uncle Ted, and we used to visit Uncle Ted with the kids a lot in Iowa, and he lived to be, I think it was 90 years old. And then this is Uncle Mark. He was the youngest one in the family. And then there was Uncle Greg, who was, I can't remember, Uncle Greg I think he was either before Uncle Ted or after Uncle Ted, and he went with a horse and buggy one night to a party in town, and he was coming home, and he was hit on the railroad tracks by a train. He was in his 20s. And the family always talked about Uncle Greg and what a special man he was. And then many years later, my Uncle Warren went out on a Sunday morning to get the Sunday paper, and just farther down on this railroad track, he was hit by.
So was this in Iowa?
In Iowa. So I lost both those uncles that way. So this is really good. This is a picture of my dad when he was older, like most of you kids remember. And this is.
We all say Jared looks like him.
Like you all remember. And this is the rich aunt. Remember, she's a daughter. She was a daughter of Zadok and Minerva.
Oh, she's the daughter of them.
This is a picture of her when she was young, and there were all the years I was growing up. I always heard these stories about. I don't think I've ever seen that.
This is Veryl's great aunt.
Then this is a picture of her and her husband when she was older. But when I was growing up, I used to hear my parents and the family and people all around the neighborhood knew her about a great businesswoman she was, and how independent she was. She would have been the first feminist, probably in the Bowen.
Explain her connection again, who she is, how she connects in the family.
Okay, she is the daughter of Zadok and his second wife.
So your great aunt?
Sister of Walter. She's a sister of Walter, who is her grandfather.
So a great aunt.
So she's my great aunt, and she married a man who was from just a few miles over. His name was Steele. And they went to Texas, and I don't understand how all this went, but there was an Oklahoma, well, they went first to Oklahoma. I guess there was an Oklahoma land rush or something like that. You history buffs.
Yeah, there's been land
And he went in and got land that way, and he accumulated a lot of land in Texas, and it had oil and gas on it, and they didn't have children. And when my aunt, she couldn't have children. And when my Aunt Edith died, after Uncle Irv died, when we were first married, they had something like 39 extended heirs, you know, that
Must be who Edith was named after.
like nieces and nephews and people that they will money to. Well, see, this money is still dribbling down now to my generation. So that's where my spending money comes from.
This is her when
Mom's
she's
famous
older.
oil check.
Yeah,
It's the same lady right here.
Yes,
We always wear those checks.
Yeah.
We get one for about $13 every year.
Okay. All
Here you
right,
go.
okay, these are just pictures of the house, and this, I mean, you maybe have all read this. This is the Hudson 8 car that I learned to drive on, drove all through high school, all around, picked up kids all over the country, just like
I know, we were.
played for church.
Little
You know.
social butter.
Yeah,
Oh,
little
so it's
social
even happened back
butterfly.
then,
My
huh?
parents would let me take the car, and so I pick up kids for 4-H and school and so forth.
Could you see over the wheel?
Oh yeah, I could see over the road. That was a neat car. And then,
Grandma Bowen could. Yeah, she did, but
Yeah,
she
she
put
drove. My
pads on
grandma,
the chair so she could see over the
yeah,
edge.
she was little. She was only about 5
And she drove that pickup.
Yeah, she'd bounce around on the seat sort of as the pickup would go, and she'd be driving, you know, how the wheel has a lot of give in it, so your memories are of her just kind of bouncing along driving.
I
And we always-
remember Grandpa was driving his pickup down and he doesn't say a word, he just kind of like that, and he points at the odometer and it flips over on the 100,000th time.
Yeah, Grandpa would hardly ever say a word to us. He just,
I just remember him starting the tractor up with the thing behind it, and we'd run out to catch up with him, and he'd never talk to us.
he
He'd
wouldn't
just drive
take
around.
us. You could tell it pleased him.
Really.
well, he was quiet. He did love children, though. My mom said he always wanted to have a big family of kids, but they just
Friendly.
they
They're
were
not. We were
married
all
7
great.
years before I was born.
My grandma did all the
Edith was
talking.
born 2
We just
years
sat there.
after, and they just never. I guess they couldn't have any more children. And,
The cat too.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
my dad in Iowa started a thrashing crew with a steam engine and a thrashing machine, and they went all around up there and thrashed for everybody. And then when my dad came to Kansas, he used to do the same thing when he was a young man. And the thing I remember is at the end of the chicken house, there was this big old steam engine and thrashing machine parked there. And of course, the grass was growing up all around it. But I can remember once or twice we started it up, and it was so noisy, you know, just a chugging away. It was almost scary, but it was exciting at the same time. Of course, we had the outhouse, and I think I took this picture of Edith painting the outhouse. And I'm hoping we can drive down along this side of the farm, and this bridge is no longer there, but this was the most exciting bridge to drive over because you had your crosswise planks, and then it had planks that went lengthwise over it, and so you'd go around the corner here, and you hoped that when you got up on the bridge, you were on the lengthwise planks. Otherwise, it threw you off, and you wondered if you were going to go off the bridge or not.
Because if you miss it and have to back up, you know you're in trouble.
That's right. And this is Dad with his combine, and this is the old barn after it was kind of on its way out. And then I just put these in so you could kind of see a little bit of what the inside of the house looked like. And this woodwork is pretty, and this is the kitchen. If we just look over in that direction, that is where the school was that I went to school at. And my grandfather, Zadok Bowen, according to family legend, said that he organized, or he at least helped organize that school. Well, I'm quite confident that he helped organize it. I guess we always thought, well, he was the one who organized the school.
Well, he may have been the leader.
Yeah,
but
he
you're
may have been
making
the leader
organizer.
because he was a teacher in Indiana before they came here. And so he wanted a school for his little girl, his little surviving girl, Anne Marie, to go to. And Minerva, the woman that he married second, my great-grandmother, was hired to be a teacher. She was a young widow. She had been married before, and we don't know what happened to her first husband, but she had
He died of Painter's College.
she had a little girl. She had 2 children, but one of her children had died, and she had a little girl. So I have a letter that Zadok, a love letter that Zadok wrote to Minerva.
Business letter.
Yeah, it's kind of a business style letter, but it's really a neat letter, and it is in the history that I think all of the kids have. But anyway, he was sort of proposing to her that, you know, he thought she was beautiful
Business letter.
and that she
Sounds like a love
could
letter.
investigate his standing and so forth.
So what grade what grade did you
Well,
go up
it
to
was
here?
1 through 8. So anyway, Minerva taught there, and then of course my dad went to school there and his family,
Yeah.
and then Edith and I went there.
Yeah.
And it closed shortly after Edith finished school there. But when I was there were only about 8 students there. At one time I think maybe there were 12 there, but there were all 8 grades. One of my cousins, Uncle Warren's daughter from Iowa, taught there 1 year. She came down here and taught because she couldn't find a teaching job in Iowa. So that school has a history, and it's called West Fairview School, and it looked like this. It had this ante room added on the front when I went to school there. And I walked, when the weather was good, I walked from down there and then up that road that I'm hoping we'll get to go down. And I don't know, what time is it getting to be?
Is that 7 miles?
Well, it was a mile and a quarter. It seemed like 7 miles, but it was a mile and a quarter.
If it was 7 miles.
All uphill.
Well, it wasn't
Well, I know, but Mom would have to beat you.
So it was officially a mile and a quarter, but my dad would take me if the weather was really, really bad. But, one other thing too is these roads were mud roads. I mean, this has rock on it, but it was a mud road. So if it rained and got muddy, then a lot of times we just couldn't go places. And I was so upset because some places I wanted to go and it got muddy. And we couldn't.
We should make our driveway mud so Charles can't leave all the time, you know. She's always got. She would be crushed if she couldn't go somewhere.
I put a picture of this. This wall ribbon barn is not connected to this, but maybe I should explain this to you at another time. But this barn is about, probably 5 or 6 miles to the north of here. And my mother's father came over from Holland when he was 19 years of age and helped build that barn. It was a huge barn, but it has fallen down now too. And since we are kind of running short on time, I think we won't try to go there. And then that brings us up to the Montfort page, and we'll let that go until after we go
Yeah,
to Twin Mounds. So Mabel, these are my mother's parents are buried. And see, Jim
Your mother's parents. So now we're on the other side of your family, right?
Yeah, this is on my mother's side of the family, and Jim is the son of Uncle Henry right here. This is his father. And this is my mother's brothers and sisters, and this is Grandma.
Yep.
Here. Grandpa was dead several years. Aunt Adelia is the only one of this group that's still living, and we hope to see her on Sunday. Here's Uncle Charlie and Uncle Clarence and Aunt Jenny and Uncle John. Uncle John was married to a Mormon.
That's the one that we went and stayed at in
Right, on
California.
your honeymoon. And then this is my mom
Okay.
and Aunt Mabel. And
I don't know if he's really named after him,
What I
but
think is so nice is just,
that's how we got his name.
yeah, just being in Kansas and realizing what their life sort of was like
see, we
in
think,
the hot fields.
yeah, well, I hope you guys will get that you'll realize what it was.
I don't know if it's possible, Mom.
I'm just sorry. I just think, I wanted to give you a taste of what it's like where I grew up. So, but we're rushing through it so fast.
No,
Well,
we're
we
getting it, Mom.
understand.
We're getting it.
We're getting it.
We really are getting it.
So why don't some of you kids go, or all of you kids go and stand?
I think we ought to have a solo shot of Kara.
No, I don't think so.
Tom and Stacy, at least, since you have a
And
Jake.
probably
I
Steve
think we
too.
should have Chris stand
I
on
think
his head.
Tom and Stacy need to be behind the stone. Yeah.
All right, Stacy, we're
You need to be behind.
You guys win the. You get because this is Jacob. Then you get to stand there.
Oh, this is the Jacob. Oh. You didn't know that you named Jacob after Jacob Montfort, did you? Yeah, I did. Yeah, it is kind of hot out here, isn't it?
Especially when you're kissing.
You better be ready.
I'm ready.
Oh, I took one off. Oh.
That's the official 50th anniversary picture.
11 by 14.
Yeah, 11 by 14. We'll put it up in the. You guys are responsible for putting on the front of the program in December for Sacrament.
Don't we need to submit it to the newspaper?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thanks.